The silence was the first thing I noticed. A deep, hollow quiet that had replaced the familiar hum of home. I stood in the doorway of what was once my father's study, but it was no longer his. It was a space stripped of its soul, its bookshelves bare, its great oak desk gone. The air, once thick with the scent of old paper and leather, now smelled only of dust and absence. My parents had sold it all. The land, the house, the future I thought was mine. They had done so in secret, their signatures on a document I had never seen, their reasons a whispered mystery that left a chasm in my world. My heart beat a slow, heavy rhythm in my chest, a drum of betrayal. I traced the faint outline on the wall where a map of the estate had hung for 100 years. It was a map of my life, of every stream, every stand of ancient trees, every field I knew by name. Now, it was just a ghostly rectangle on faded wallpaper. The inheritance was not merely money or property. It was a lineage, a connection to the earth that had sustained my family for generations. And with a stroke of a pen, it had been severed. My own parents, the architects of my world, had become its demolishers, leaving me adrift in the ruins. I walked through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing like a visitor in a forgotten museum. Each space held a phantom memory. Here, the scent of my mother's baking. There, the sound of my father's laughter. But these were ghosts, and I could no longer live among them. The sense of betrayal was a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders, making it hard to breathe. They had left a small envelope on the mantelpiece. Inside, there was cash and a short, sterile note. It spoke of new beginnings, of a difficult but necessary choice. But all I could feel was the finality of an ending. The sun began to set, casting long, distorted shadows across the floorboards. The house groaned, settling in the evening cool. It sounded lonely. Or perhaps that was just the echo of my own heart. I knew then that I could not stay. To remain would be to suffocate under the weight of what was lost. The world outside the window, once a familiar comfort, now seemed vast and unknown. But it was the only direction left to go. The house had emptied itself of me, and so I had to empty myself of it. The journey had to begin. I left before the sun rose. A single bag was all I carried, filled with the barest of essentials. The front door clicked shut behind me with a sound of profound finality. The air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of morning dew and damp earth. I did not look back. To look back would be to invite the ghosts of yesterday to walk with me, and I needed to walk alone. My first steps were tentative, uncertain, each one a quiet rebellion against the life that had been stolen from me. The gravel of the driveway crunched under my boots, the only sound in a world holding its breath. The road stretched out before me, a ribbon of gray disappearing into the pre-dawn mist. I had no destination, no map to guide my way. My only compass was a deep, instinctual pull away from the source of my pain. I walked for hours, my legs finding a rhythm, my mind a blank slate. The sun climbed higher, burning away the mist and revealing the rolling hills that marked the edge of my former life. Here, the world felt different. The birdsong seemed unfamiliar. The trees cast new and strange shadows. I was a stranger in a land I thought I knew. As midday approached, I stopped to rest beneath a solitary oak tree. Its branches, gnarled and ancient, reached for the sky like weathered arms. I leaned against its trunk, feeling the rough bark against my back. The tree had stood here for centuries, a silent witness to the passing of seasons, the coming and going of generations. It had seen storms and droughts, yet it remained. Its resilience was a quiet lesson. It did not fight the wind, but bent with it. It did not despair in winter, but waited patiently for the return of spring. A profound sense of smallness washed over me. Out here, under the vast open sky, my personal tragedy felt insignificant. The world was so much larger than my loss, so much older than my family's name. The wind whispered through the leaves of the oak, a sound like 1,000 quiet voices. For the first time since discovering the betrayal, the knot of anger in my stomach began to loosen. I was not just a victim of circumstance. I was a part of this immense breathing world. And in that realization, a flicker of freedom was kindled. Days turned into a week, and the rolling hills gave way to an immense flat expanse. The Great Plains opened up before me, a sea of grass that stretched to the horizon in every direction. The sky above was a vast, unbroken dome of blue, so large it felt as if it might swallow me whole. The wind was a constant companion here. It never ceased its movement, sweeping across the grasslands with a low, mournful sound. It was a voice, ancient and powerful, whispering secrets I could not quite understand but felt deep in my bones. It spoke of eternity, of vastness, of a world that existed long before me and would exist long after. I moved slowly, deliberately, my pace matching the unhurried rhythm of the land itself. There was no need to rush. The horizon never seemed to get any closer. I learned to read the subtle language of the plains. The way the tall grasses bent and swayed told of the wind's direction and strength. The calls of distant birds were signals, warnings of an approaching hawk, or the location of a hidden water source. My senses, dulled by the predictable comforts of my old life, began to sharpen. I could smell rain on the air hours before the clouds gathered. One afternoon, I sat perfectly still for what felt like hours, watching a herd of wild horses graze in the distance. They moved with a fluid grace, their coats shimmering in the golden light. They were utterly wild, completely free. There was a leader, a magnificent stallion that stood watch, its head held high, its ears twitching at every sound. There was no contract, no deed, no inheritance that bound them to this land. They belonged to it simply by being. They were a part of its wild heart, and it was a part of them. Their freedom felt more real, more profound than any ownership. As I watched them, a thought took root in my mind. Perhaps my parents, in their act of betrayal, had inadvertently given me a gift. They had taken away the land I was meant to inherit, but in doing so, they had untethered me. They had forced me out into this vast, untamed world. They had broken the chain of expectation and obligation that had bound me. Here, on the whispering plains, surrounded by the immensity of nature, I was not an heir who had lost their inheritance. I was simply a living being, small and insignificant, yet free. Leaving the plains behind, I followed the sound of running water until I came to a river. It was not a gentle, meandering stream, but a powerful current that had carved a deep canyon through the rock over millennia. The water was a brilliant, clear turquoise, rushing over smooth gray stones and plunging into deep, dark pools. The sound was a constant roar, a symphony of power and persistence that filled the air and vibrated through the soles of my boots. I made my camp near its edge, the spray from the rapids cooling my face. The river was alive, a force of nature that demanded respect. I spent my days exploring the canyon, tracing the river's path. I observed the patient work of the water, how it had relentlessly worn away the hardest stone, not through brute force, but through constant, unwavering flow. It was a powerful metaphor. The river did not try to smash the obstacles in its path. It simply flowed around them, over them, through them, until the obstacle itself was worn away. It showed me that resilience was not always about standing firm, but sometimes about being fluid, adaptable, and persistent in the face of immovable things. One evening, as the sun set fire to the canyon walls, I watched a family of otters playing in a calm eddy. They slid down the muddy banks, wrestled in the shallows, and floated on their backs, their movements a dance of pure, unadulterated joy. They were completely present in the moment, their lives dictated by the simple rhythms of the river. They sought food, they played, they rested. There was no thought of yesterday's loss or tomorrow's uncertainty. Their existence was a lesson in simplicity, a reminder that life, at its core, is about finding joy in the here and now. The river became my teacher. Its constant movement washed away the residue of my anger and grief. Its steady, powerful voice drowned out the whispers of betrayal that had haunted me for so long. Staring into its clear depths, I saw my own reflection, but it was not the face of a disinherited youth I saw. It was the face of a survivor, a wanderer, someone who was learning to find their own way, to carve their own path, just as the river had carved its canyon. The water offered no easy answers, but it offered a profound sense of peace. My journey eventually led me into a sparse, forgotten woodland that bordered the plains. The trees were old, their trunks twisted and their branches thin, as if they had struggled for every inch of growth. It was a quiet, contemplative place. One blustery afternoon, as I was seeking shelter from a sudden gust of wind, I noticed something caught in the low branches of a thorny bush. It was a piece of paper, folded and yellowed with age, fluttering like a trapped bird. Curiosity piqued, I carefully worked it free from the thorns that held it captive, my fingers gentle against the fragile document. Unfolding it, I saw that it was not just any piece of paper. It was a legal document, a deed of trust. The paper was old, the ink faded, but still legible. It was a document I had never seen before, one that predated my parents' sale of the land. It was signed by my great-grandmother, a woman known for her fierce independence and foresight. The formal, looping script described a trust, a legal protection placed upon a specific, secluded part of the estate. The old woods, the river canyon, the wild heart of the land. It was a portion of the inheritance set apart, untouchable, preserved for a future generation. The words on the page seemed to shimmer. This document stipulated that this portion of the land could not be sold, only passed down, held in trust for the bloodline. My parents, in their haste or their ignorance, had overlooked this. They had sold what they could, but they could not sell this. The wind, which had seemed so aimless, had delivered this forgotten promise into my hands. It was as if the land itself had conspired to keep a part of itself for me, a secret held in trust not just by law, but by the wildness of the place itself. A profound sense of peace settled over me, deeper and more lasting than any I had felt before. The paper in my hand was not a weapon for revenge, but a key. It was a chance not to reclaim what was lost, but to protect what remained. My journey had taught me that my true inheritance was not ownership, but stewardship. The vast landscapes had recalibrated my soul, and the river had cleansed it. I looked back at the path I had traveled. I was no longer lost. I was found. With this paper, and the strength I had discovered within, a new possibility was born.